Okay, folks, we'll make a start. Welcome. So this is our Q&A session on Zoom. I suppose this comes out of the fact that we had a lot of questions, not all of which we were able to get through during the initial Zoom training that we provided. And we said we'd do a follow-up once people had the chance, I suppose, to use Zoom for a while and I suppose come up with certain operational and technical questions. We've also had a number of kind of tickets, I suppose, that are getting sent into us, and we did invite staff to send on some questions in advance of this session. We debated up until about 10 minutes ago, actually, exactly what kind of format we were going to follow. And I think largely we're going to follow maybe a slide-based one for a while. So Shane, who will be leading out on a lot of the questions and more importantly, on a lot of the answers, has put together a number of slides based on the questions that people have. And I've a few as well that were sent on to me directly. And those of you who are joining us through YouTube can feel free to throw in some questions there as well. And I think Dara will be available, and I'll be available as well to answer some of those. So I don't know if that kind of fits with your concept of things, Shane. I can talk about some questions that have come across my desk lately, or do you want to dive into some?
No, do you want to go ahead, Gearoid, maybe, and we can treat this as a kind of a fluid thing. There's stuff coming in the Q&A as well, and we can be answering as they go along. So if you want to go ahead first, that'd be great. Yeah.
Okay. So a recent one that I got yesterday was simply around kind of downloading the Zoom client, and a question of whether there was a difference between the Zoom client that we were getting people to download and the Zoom client that they might previously have downloaded, say, you know, in context of having used Zoom before the official rollout, as it were. My own understanding is there is just one Zoom app, but there are different versions of the license, I suppose, that might be associated with accounts. But perhaps you can put us all right on that one there, Shane?
Yeah, no, that's correct. So the meeting client will always be the same. It's important, I suppose, on that note, to make sure that you keep the client updated. So any updates, as with any other applications, would sort of be made available to you and made known in the client. So keeping them up to date is important, but also it's just one app. It's the one meeting client. All CIT staff and all students get excuse me, they get licenses under our agreement with Zoom. So you all get kind of pro licenses, and that gives you the ability to do a lot, to use all of the extra features within Zoom, including the likes of recording, which a lot of you have done already. But polls and stuff like that wouldn't be available in the basic version. The pro version covers a lot of that. So yeah, that's the same client. And if there were any technicians or anything rolling that out in machines in the college, it would be just the same client as well.
Very good. And then a kind of a related question was, if people want to keep on their existing personal account, let's say, and also to use the CIT one, I presume that would be something they could sort out for themselves by simply logging off one account and logging into the other. There's no need to use a different machine or anything like that.
Yeah, so the logging in part, I suppose you can use Zoom wherever, I suppose, yes. But the logging in part is important to do initially. I think we highlighted it in one of the training sessions, but that URL, if you haven't used it already, I'll just bring it up there, telcit.zoom.us. That brings you to a sign-in option there. And this step is identical for students as well. Once you do that, you're mapped into your grouping. So for staff, they'll be mapped into the staff grouping, and you get obviously more enhanced permissions than students will, just because of the way you'll be running classes. You don't want students having access to all of the features or being able to do things while you're presenting. But yeah, that step is important. And I suppose on that point as well, you may have noticed that there's this notification came up in Canvas yesterday, probably because you were a student of some module at some stage. The announcement went out to all students in the college in CIT that are registered as students for whatever module in Canvas. This is a way for us to sort of maybe just to get that message out there to students to follow those steps. There's 5 steps to getting set up, similar to the ones that you would have done last week when setting up or are going to do to set yourself up. And they're important because at the moment, students that aren't using Zoom will have to either switch their previous account if they had an @mycit email address associated with it, or they'll simply just have to do that mapping that you are doing as well. So that's important. If you do come across that, that's what that notice is about, or that announcement, and we would encourage staff to maybe just to point that out to students as well. And you can always copy the link that's there as well in terms of just getting set up. We're getting quite a number of queries in from students that may not be following these steps. So any way that we can get out the word there would be appreciated.
Yeah, that kind of nicely brings me on to a query that's come up in slightly different ways from a number of different staff. And I suppose it's encouraging actually, because it suggests people are beginning to move beyond just using Zoom as a sort of a broadcast technology. But the question is how to get students to present, how to get students to share maybe what they're working on, or do a bit of a presentation. I presume the secret there, Shane, is to go to your participant list and to give them different privileges within the particular Zoom class that you're facilitating. Or is there a more straightforward way to?
Sorry, Gearoid, I just got distracted there. One of the questions, could you just repeat that a second?
I'm sorry, Shane. So giving students the ability to present their work or to share their screens.
Okay, so they do get the ability to present by default. The security tab in your Zoom meeting client, you'll see it at the very bottom. That allows you to turn on or off that feature. There's a share screen tick and there's a chat tick as well there. If you untick that, students can share their screen. If you tick it, obviously they can. By default, they can. I suppose just from our experience with online programs, so long as the students know almost like the ground rules of what to do and not what to do in a class, they'll get used to having those features available to them, and it saves you as well having to switch things on and off once you know that those options are there. But if ever in doubt, that security tab basically dictates what they can and can't do, particularly when with regard to screen sharing. So by default, students can share with you. Sorry, you're muted there, Gearoid.
Sorry. So my question was, how do I unmute myself? No, but a slightly trickier kind of version of the same thing. Is it possible to get students to share something privately? So there might be a case where you just want to see what one student is working on. Is there perhaps a workaround with breakout rooms, for example, that could be used?
Breakout rooms would be the way to go there. All right, so you can. We will be covering breakout rooms actually in the next Zoom session, which is next Tuesday, I believe. But obviously, we can send you on links to any of the relevant documentation if you want to play around with that in the meantime. But breakout rooms are really powerful in terms of being able to not only do group sessions, but to kind of almost allocate a virtual room for an individual. So you can do that in the class itself. So you can do it once the class has started and you know who's in there. You can actually break those individuals out into groups or into individual rooms, and that would be the way then that you could just kind of move from room to room, so from virtual room to virtual room, and talk to the students and work through whatever they're doing. So maybe that's just an individual presentation to yourself.
Okay, very good. And then there was a related question about using Zoom in connection with remote labs. So this is a very kind of specific kind of an issue, I suppose, in cases where a head of department or a lecturer, I suppose, has designated a physical computer lab for use for kind of cloud-based use of software. And so the question is, can Zoom still be used in conjunction with that kind of setup? And my understanding certainly is that it can be, and students can have access to these virtual desktops and use Zoom more or less in the way we just described, including sharing what they're working on the virtual machine, or including you sharing what you're working on the virtual machine with students. So those two solutions work quite well together, the virtual desktop and Zoom. I don't know if you have anything to add there, Shane. Or...
No, I think that's spot on, Gearoid. I don't think there's much to add there. I suppose as people go on and they get more comfortable with using Zoom, they'll find sort of creative ways of using it to solve problems that existed either in the face-to-face environment, but also it opened up new opportunities there. The obviously that integration within Canvas allows you to schedule classes, and I suppose it has come up a few times that people have been asking, can I schedule a class for my section or for a group? And unfortunately you can't, because the integration doesn't work that way. It's very much built at module level. The only way that you, as we would see it, that you can solve that problem is just by labeling your classes accordingly, your scheduled classes. But also you can you can look at the whole registration idea. So there's a registration feature when you're scheduling a class, that you can ask only the students that are participating in a certain group session that they register for that session. And that's an option when you're scheduling a class. And then they would be the only ones that would be able to access that session, if that makes sense. So there's a number of ways around that issue, I suppose. Number one, you look at labeling the meetings or the classes according to their groups. Or number two, you look at maybe just having a registration option there, which you take and you just say to the students that are in certain groups to register for those. Outside of that, I suppose you do have the ability to use, to set up meetings outside of Canvas. That's perfectly fine, but I suppose in the main we would recommend, for any class activity, for that to happen through Canvas. That's simply because you're able to record into Canvas. Students can access it easily. Everything is very integrated, so it integrates into the student's calendar. You're going to see all of the previous classes and so on. The minute you start to go outside of Canvas and to start to schedule classes from the Zoom client, you're losing that integration. You're losing the ability to see that stuff in Canvas, and then it gets a bit trickier. You're going to have to maybe copy and paste links and so on. Another related maybe thing to note as well with recordings, if you do choose to record a session, is that recordings are only available to CIT registered students. So they're not going to be able to access the recording using a Zoom basic account that they have with another alias, like a Gmail account or something like that. So it's important, I suppose, in looking at the announcement that we sent out there to students, and in that webinar that's being delivered again tomorrow by Dara, is that those students do go through the proper process of getting themselves the Zoom account and using single sign-on, similar to the way that you would have had to get your license account. So sorry, I've kind of gone on a small bit there, but there are a few kind of important related points, I suppose.
Yeah, that's kind of the most of what I have. Shane, I don't know if you want to, I can talk you through some of the stuff that's coming up on YouTube if you like.
Yeah, for sure.
I know you had some stuff prepared as well in your slides.
I might do the slides as well as maybe, so we might do a couple of slides, Gearoid, and if you want to come in on the YouTube stuff, we might work with that. So I'm just going to move into sort of a few of the kind of the headline themes that we kind of came across in some of the direct queries relating to the Q&A session today, but also, over the last week as people started getting familiar with Zoom. So number one was the idea of waiting rooms and the idea of can I turn this off? Unfortunately, that's not something we can do. It is very much part of the security policy within the institute, but also with Zoom. Security, when I mention security, I suppose waiting rooms will be a sort of a mandatory function rolled out by Zoom very shortly. I think it's the end of this month or something. They're going to be rolling it out as a sort of a mandatory thing that you have to have switched on your meetings, either that or passcodes. Now we know that we can use passcodes for external parties coming in to access Zoom meetings, and that would be the advice for if you had a class that you were scheduling that you wanted an external speaker or something like that to come in on. It'd be important to use the passcode function there. But waiting rooms are very much a security policy decision in the institute, and I suppose in terms of the waiting room, it is something that just takes a bit of getting used to. A part of the thing around that would be communication to the students, I think, in attending the classes, that they'll know, I suppose through the calendar, they'll know that the class is going to be scheduled for a certain time and they'll come to that. Maybe you allow something like, a few minutes at the beginning to let them into the class. And then after that, I think you just take it for granted that students have come. I mean, if they're waiting in the waiting room, after that point, unfortunately, you're going to have to either, it's something you might have to monitor, but I think with clear communication to the students to show up for a certain time, that would be the way around that particular issue, and not having to monitor the waiting room. But it very much is a security issue. I'm not sure, Gearoid, if you want to come in on that as well.
Yeah, I guess just as Shane is saying, it takes a bit of getting used to. I can remember moving from Adobe Connect to Zoom, and for a while finding it a kind of an unwelcome distraction. But listen, if you think back, for example, to some of the negative press that Zoom received maybe back in April around, so-called Zoom bombing, a lot of it actually related to people not having waiting rooms, to not having that kind of extra step there where you could double check that whoever was joining your meeting was somebody who you wanted there. And I suppose it is just a matter of getting used to it as an instructor, but perhaps your students getting used to it as well, and maybe them getting the sense that it's not okay to rock up 15 minutes after the hour, interrupting class and having to be left in. But I suppose it's up to individual lecturers to come up with their own solutions there. There are a few more questions there coming in, Shane, in a few different formats, which might be hard for you to follow. So I have some stuff on YouTube, some stuff in the chat here, and some stuff in the Q&A here in the webinar. Will I throw one or two things at you?
Yeah, shoot, throw away, sure, yeah.
So one of the ideas was, are breakout rooms just the best way of doing kind of individual tutorials, like one-on-one things? Would you have to do 35 breakout rooms for 35 different students and visit each of them one by one? Dara had suggested, which seems faster to me, that you could think of the breakout room as just being one single private space, and then you could add or remove students to it one by one if you did want to do some kind of tutorial type thing. When I've done sessions like that, I've tended to schedule students, and the waiting room feature then becomes quite helpful. So I might kind of indicate to Shane that I will talk to him from 10 past 1 until 20 past 1, and then it's someone else's turn, but they don't come in on top of us because the waiting room feature allows me to, well, as the name suggests, keep them waiting until I'm willing to bring them through. Do you want to add anything there, Shane, or will I keep going?
Yeah, I mean, there is an option to pre-assign waiting rooms or breakout rooms as well. I don't think we're quite there though yet. It really depends on all of the data coming in from enrollments and the way that students are accessing Zoom to be to be spot on. And at the moment, because of just the way we have kind of flux in the way registrations happen and different users with different roles accessing Canvas, there is a transition period there where students are still getting to sign into their Zoom accounts and claim their MyCIT email addresses. We're very much looking to that being a short-term thing. That'll be maybe over the next maybe 2 weeks, and after that time we will be restricting it to only certain domains, so at MyCIT and CIT email addresses. That way the attendance data will be very clean, I guess, but it will also allow you to pre-assign breakout rooms by uploading CSVs beforehand. So that's an option when you're scheduling the class, that you can do so. But as Gearoid said, you can do very much all of that stuff as well in the live session with a bit of planning, and you can drop people into maybe the room when they're needed to be in that room, if that makes sense. But yeah, a combination of things really there, Gearoid, I suppose. But we'll be dealing with breakout rooms with a few kind of live people, put it that way, live students. We'll have a few of my colleagues and a few students coming in on a session that we're doing on Tuesday to just go through all of the kind of the mechanics of breakout rooms, including maybe pre-assigning.
Okay, I have another slightly more complicated one here, which I think relates maybe to the integration of Zoom and Canvas again. So here's the scenario. Somebody set up a meeting for a colleague and added them as a host. Does this person have the ability to start the meeting, or has the person only got the ability to join the meeting afterwards?
Yeah, so I believe the case there is that if you add someone else as a host, they won't be able to start the meeting before you unless they're registered or enrolled as an instructor on the module. So by default, within Canvas, you can have multiple instructors delivering on a module, and they might be delivering different lectures, over the 13 weeks, which is grand. They can schedule them and have them labeled accordingly. Lecture 1 is Shane Cronin, lecture 2 is Gearoid O Suilleabhain. But if you try to add a co-host to a meeting that you've scheduled, you would have to be there to start that meeting, and they basically get co-hosting privileges. They can act as a co-lecturer without being enrolled on the module. But the way around that, I suppose, is if you have someone that needs to have access to a class over the whole semester, they should be enrolled on that module through Canvas.
Yeah, that does seem neater. I suppose I'm reminded of a point or a question there as well. What about guest lecturers? So if you have a module and you want to invite an outsider, let's say, to present to your class group, what's the best way to facilitate that?
Yep. So the best way to do that would be just do what you normally do in terms of scheduling a class. I'm just going to show you up here. You go to schedule your meeting, and the important thing to note down here is only authenticated users can join. So this option has the ability to have only Zoom accounts. And it also has only CIT students. Now, just to explain what these two mean, just before I go into the external speaker. So only Zoom accounts means only users that are signed in to Zoom will be able to access that. And that really refers to that audience you're talking about, those third parties, those external speakers. If you want it to just be only CIT students and just to have the ability to have this lockdown to only CIT students, only at MyCIT email address holders, that's what that option would mean. If you use the passcode option, this is advisable for external speakers, so that you're giving them a passcode. It's an extra security level. So and enter whatever the passcode is, obviously something better than passcode, and you can give them an invite then to that, and they can access that class directly from outside of Canvas as an external speaker by entering that passcode, going through the waiting room, and obviously being authenticated then as a Zoom account holder as well. So the important one there is the passcode and the only Zoom accounts option there, if that makes sense.
Okay, thanks for that. Just going back a tiny bit, question of storage. Can each module hold, say, 24 lectures, which I suppose is a standard number of lectures for 12 weeks of delivery? My understanding is that there's no issue in terms of space for recordings. Is there
No,
an
that's
individual
that's
quota? Or?
so I believe what each individual gets, I think, is something like a gigabyte of space in cloud storage, which is that's only kind of the individual quota. We also have an account quota that covers any sort of run over in that. So again, from our experience with the online programs where people have been running, 2 or 3 hour lectures a few times a week or every week, there's been no issue at all in that. And if there was ever a situation where we might see maybe things running, the space kind of being used quite rapidly, we can provision for extra space. There's no problem there. So I wouldn't be afraid about cloud recording space at all.
Yeah, and people don't need to be monitoring it or deleting things as they
Not
go.
at all. No.
So another comment, which is, I think, a reference to something that I said earlier. Oh yes, so I was suggesting, maybe you'll arrive at a policy where students shouldn't be, knocking on the door of your Zoom room quarter of an hour into class or something like that. And somebody rightly says, well, if students drop off because of bad Wi-Fi or bad internet, they probably need to be readmitted through the waiting room. I think that is the case, but I suppose there's a difference still between people having to be readmitted for perfectly good reason of having lost their internet connection and people kind of trying to get in for the first time, as it were. So the former group's going to be much smaller rather than the latter one.
I think just with Zoom, I suppose the reason we chose it as a platform, I suppose, is that it is really forgiving in terms of your internet connection, and hopefully those instances will be very low. But we've all had broadband dropouts. We know that can happen. Anyone. I suppose they can access it from multiple devices if that helps. So if you're accessing via just 3G or something like that, that's perfectly fine as well. I would say that I wouldn't treat Zoom in isolation either, and I suppose that we'd be kind of learning this as we go along. But I would look at any of the e-learning infrastructure tools that we have, including Canvas and Zoom, as working side by side. And there are options such as the chat function in Canvas, which allows students to send messages to you. Also, the inbox where they can send, again, almost like webmail messages to you. And I think these things will work in tandem with each other. I think Zoom and Canvas. So, if there are maybe issues like that, I think one will help kind of resolve the issue of the other, if you get me. So I wouldn't treat them in isolation. I think very much, and people have been asking, about, how are students notified, or how do they get notifications of recordings and stuff like that. There's only so much we can automate, I suppose, and I would really look at using announcements and just signposting in Canvas as a way to guide users through as much as the other automatic notifications that are available as well.
Yeah, well answered there, Shane. So 2 queries in broadly around the whole issue of taking attendance and knowing who has been on a particular Zoom session. There's something available there, I think, through the browser, Shane, in terms of looking for an attendance report. Do you want to?
There is. No, I won't go into it in mine because I might show attendance, but I can tell you where that is. So if you go to your account, your Zoom account, you have a reports area in Zoom. So if you log into TELCIT, I actually put it in here, telcit.zoom.us, that brings you to your almost like your kind of personal profile, your dashboard for Zoom. And there are certain features that you have available to you in there with regard to accessing recordings and also accessing reports. And the reports allow you to basically see who attended your class, and you can export that information out to CSV as well. So that's useful in terms of attendance, and worth a look, I suppose. The two main things really in terms of your profile, though, to be aware of is that the attendance or the reporting feature, and the ability to look at recording somewhere else. But they're really the only main things you get. I think everything else really you get as standard through your Canvas integration.
Okay, there's quite a few questions in the Q&A area, a lot of them answered already, but maybe for the benefit of people watching on YouTube, I might go through one or two of them. One is a bit of a bugbear of mine, and it's kind of how to connect the right monitor and how to be sure that you're sharing the presenter view, as it were, not sharing your notes or sharing PowerPoint in a kind of editor mode. So I suppose one issue is if you have more than one monitor, there's a kind of a trick PowerPoint can play on you sometimes, where it'll give you presenter mode on one monitor and give you kind of editing mode on the other. And there's an option there basically to swap between the two. So that can solve an issue with you sort of sharing the wrong view, as it were, through Zoom. The other issue that's connected in my mind, maybe not in yours, Shane, is how to kind of spot chat while you're in a kind of a full share mode, which I must admit took me a little bit of time to get used to as well. So the issue there, I think, is that when you decide to share certain bits of the very light Zoom interface tend to sort of move around, and you have to, I suppose, become accustomed to where to look and keeping your chat area open so you don't miss anything of.
Yeah, it's obviously something that if you're not used to doing, or this whole concept of sharing as opposed to maybe what people were doing in Big Blue Button where they were uploading something, there's a big difference obviously, and your interface changes, which can be a bit disconcerting. All right. I suppose the reason for it is that, you're maybe concentrating your efforts on the share rather than the other stuff, but it is possible to bring up those docs once the toolbar on the top has appeared. So when you start your share, you'll notice that toolbar moves from the very bottom to the top of the screen, and you can move that around if you want to. But there's a 3 dots which is called More, and when you click on that, you can bring up your chat, or you can bring up your participants, or your other bits there, and that basically undocks them, and you can move them around. And if you had maybe a second screen, which is useful in that context, you can move that window to the other screen, and you can monitor the chat that way. If you don't have a second screen, that's fine as well. You can just undock it, and you can still see the chat as a layer above the existing content. But I think it's really just a thing of getting used to it, really. I would have found that sort of difficult for moving from something like Adobe Connect or other platforms as well. But I think once you get used to it, really, it's just a matter of knowing where they are and how to bring them up.
Very good. Yeah. Somebody wondering about disabling the whiteboard for students. There's a reference there to creative graffiti by one student.
Yeah. Oh, well, cards on the table, the annotation feature was available to students earlier in the week, and we disabled that. That was so annotation is available as a tool over your shares. So like if you were sharing content, you could annotate over it, and we delivered a session on that there a couple of days ago, or even yesterday. Sorry, my time is all over the place. But there was the ability then for students to annotate as well as you, but we've just since isolated that down to the host, because we did get a few reports of students just not even in a malicious way, but just wondering what this button did. maybe trying to draw over the content. So that's disabled. Now, what you can do is you can enable it if you want to. You can enable students being able to annotate if you want to, but at the moment it's only the host can annotate at the time of delivery.
So that would involve just going, I presume, into the browser again, telcit.zoom.us, and looking at your settings. So you could
You can do that in the client. Sorry,
okay.
in your so when you have that that toolbar on the top show up there, you have the three dots again for more, and you can go enable or disable attendee annotation, and it's disabled by default now. But if anyone has any issues there, let us know. That was maybe an example of one of the settings. We just we thought it was better to turn it off for the time being anyway.
Okay, a question here. Is there a way of starting a Zoom meeting through the module on Canvas without notifying the students? For example, if you want to use Zoom meetings to pre-record a lecture. Now, my understanding was students don't get a notification unless you've scheduled it in such a way that it appears on the calendar. So it's really the calendar tool that might be notifying them.
Well, so that the integration will the notification will depend on the student's preferences, but they will see any scheduled class that you schedule in the main Zoom area. So if we go into this Zoom area here and we schedule, once we've scheduled a class, that'll show up in their calendar. I think that's really key to the integration, really, I suppose, because it just gives them, it integrates nicely even with the likes of the syllabus tool, where they'll see exactly what's coming up in their module summary as well, and when the classes are coming up. If you want to do a class that's a pre-record and you don't want it to show up in their calendar, what you can do is you can use your personal meeting room. And you can start a session from there. It's not tied to the calendar. You can record it, and then you can make that recording available to the students afterwards. So that's what I'd recommend for that. I suppose you can treat the upcoming meetings area as the area that you schedule any of your classes, and they do get added to the calendar. Now, it really depends on how students have their notification settings configured, but most of them should get notifications, yes, of anything that's scheduled in here. And that's the workaround. I think you can either use the personal meeting room to do the pre-record, or you could do it from the client directly. But I think, again, trying to do stuff from within Canvas in the first instance is a good place to go.
Okay, so apologies if I'm missing anything now. I'm just kind of scanning quickly through things. A few people mention Big Blue Button. I suppose it might be no harm just to say very quickly what the story there is. So I suppose we rolled out Big Blue Button back in March. For various reasons, it was technically easy to do the rollout. And we know from our stats and we know from our survey that a lot of staff were really great in terms of getting to grips with it. But 70% of staff who responded to our survey indicated that they'd been doing some kind of live delivery, typically through Big Blue Button. But ultimately, we found it buggy and poorly supported. But we are supporting it for one last semester. I suppose there's much more to be kind of said about that. But I'm only raising it there because there's a number of questions that are sort of trying to kind of compare Big Blue Button features with Zoom features, and I suppose I guess it is people trying to make that kind of transition over. In fact, I think a number of the questions actually that we've been dealing with there, Shane, are people trying to do a bit of kind of learning transfer over, if you like, to Zoom.
Yep. Do you want me to move on to a couple of I think we talked about breakout rooms. I might just talk about a couple of the things that came up as well as themes. So this one is the idea of creating groups. I think we talked about this already, actually, didn't we? So yeah, that's covered actually, the groups bit. Um, Student screen sharing, we cover that as well actually. Recordings, reports. So maybe the idea of editing recordings, that's something that people are asking about. You can edit a recording by trimming it, but you can't, unfortunately, edit it any other way unless you download the recording. So only lecturing staff have the ability to download recordings, students don't. That's an important note, I suppose. And uh, in that sort of if you go to your tel cit.zoom.us area, your profile, you'll see your recordings tab, and you'll be able to go in there, and actually when you preview your recording, you can trim the start and the end of that recording if you wish. The other thing around sort of editing, though, I suppose, is just to be aware maybe of the ability to pause recordings and to play them again in when you're delivering your session. So, like, you can pause your shares and your and you can also do it for recording. So, if you don't want sort of empty space at the beginning of a session, I would just record maybe when you're ready, rather than recording at the very beginning. And there's clear indicators in the top there as well when you have something in recording mode in the red or paused as well. Can I record the live chat so that it is played back when the recorded with the recording lecture? That's actually turned off at present. Again, a related sort of a data protection issue as much as anything else. Really, that was something that was turned off. But I suppose just to be cognizant of when you're delivering, maybe to address the questions that are asked by the students for the benefit of the recording is a good idea. Gearoid, I don't know, do you want to come in on the live chat option there as well?
Yeah, I think as you say, it's probably the best balance between, I don't know, privacy and utility. If you simply read out the questions that are coming in, if it's something you want to incorporate into your lecture, a decision was made based on best advice we received, I suppose, to reduce the amount of student data, I suppose, that was getting captured in the recordings. A few people there, Shane, wondering about tablets, and I think it's both graphics tablets and the likes of iPads as well. How to use them? Obviously, graphics tablets really great if you want to have your slides and then sort of do with Johnny Giles on it or whatever. Draw kind of arrows and make annotations and things like that. The iPad is somewhat slightly different um, idea, but could be put to a similar purpose. And do you have any
Yeah,
advice there?
I think definitely the if you have like an iPad or an Android tablet, they're actually perfectly fine for the most part for doing the sort of the whiteboarding and stuff like that. I think it's where you might be looking into sort of more intricate things and maybe more advanced sort of drawing tools and features that you might be looking into the realm of a graphics tablet. Um, we've used and our colleagues in the online programs have used Wacom tablets, which are they're made for multimedia artists or graphic designers, but the transfer of those functions works quite well into this sort of area where you might be using it for more precise sort of annotation, and you have pen weights and different drawing tools available to you even on the tablet. But they're possibly overkill for most. I think if you're looking at just even starting off, using a normal tablet like an iPad would be a good place to start, and you kind of use either a stylus or even just your finger for those annotations. And I think the tablet is a nice interface for that rather than your mouse. It's definitely superior to using the mouse and the whiteboard feature. But we can send on a bit of info to you on maybe recommended, or just create an article really on recommended peripherals there if people are interested. But yeah, that would be my take on it anyway so far, I suppose, from using them.
Yeah, and look, I think there is an ability for people to purchase things through their departments, who can then kind of recoup the money from a central fund that has been created to support teaching staff through, purchasing different equipment and peripherals. You can also purchase it yourself and put through a refund. Somebody wondering about using virtual backgrounds, like using a blurred background as in MS Teams. So my understanding is this is obviously possible inside Zoom. Just beside the webcam icon, there's the ability to choose a virtual background, but it can vary in terms of how well it works. If you have a relatively featureless and well-lit background, as I have here, it'll work just fine. Or if you have a computer with a good graphics card, it'll work just fine. But if you don't have either, you may discover that it doesn't work as well as you might like.
Yeah, I can just do a quick demo of it there if you want. It's available under your, almost like where your webcam features are, so stop video or start video. But again, as Gearoid said, it's very much dependent on your background. So I'm just going to throw a background behind me, and it's okay. Like it really depends on how plain that background is, but you can use it. It's comparable to the features in Teams, except for the fact I don't think you have the blur background option, which you do have in Teams. But apart from that, I see Gearoid doing the same there. The only full sure way of having a kind of a seamless virtual background is by having a green screen, and you can pick up green screens online as well, or just have a green wall, which none of us would have in our house, but you know what I mean. It is, that's the only full sure way of having a seamless sort of a background behind you. I have headphones on now here, and there's you can see the white around the headphones. I did it in the training session as well yesterday, so I treat it sparingly, to be honest, because it does have it has implications in terms of your processing and the bandwidth as well that you're using, but mainly the graphics card on your machine will start to get under pressure when you're doing that as well, you know. So is there maybe, will I just look at the managing students bit? Is that
Sure.
okay? So there's a few questions there about how to enable the students to a screen share. Actually, do you know what, we've answered a few of these already as well. Is there a way, sorry, we did the enable screen share, that's enabled by default. Is there a way to mute all attendees and stop them from turning on their mics again? There is. So in the participants panel, if you're ever in doubt, just go to the participants panel and you have any of those sort of control elements available to you in there, including the mute all, and you also have the ability to allow participants to unmute themselves. So if you untick the allow participants to unmute themselves, it'll stop them from being able to unmute themselves. The default, again, and this is again just from experience with the online programs, is we've left it that students are muted by default on entry, but you have the ability then to either to lock that or to just to leave it. And the reason for that is people build in maybe questions quite often in their sessions and might open the mic up to students. It makes it a bit more interactive. I suppose you always, as with anything else, you have the ability to lock down those settings as well. So between that security tab in the bottom and the participants panel, where you can mute all and you can disallow the participants to unmute themselves, you have the ability to do all of that as well. Should students have their cameras on during a call or a class? There's nothing wrong with it. I think it's really nice at the start of semester where you're actually getting more familiar with students. Often the first time you're going to see them is at a distance anyway. Maybe in a lot of cases you're re-engaging with them. I don't think there's anything wrong with it. Maybe I think, again, from our experience with the online programs, students tend to use it initially and they tend not to use it then later on in the semester, unless it was maybe for group activities and stuff like that. I think they just kind of get on with it, Gearoid, and they just, get used to the format of the chat and following the lectures or the recordings. But I would certainly see the webcam as being quite important for the likes of group sessions or kind of clinics and stuff like that, where you just want that visual sort of engagement or that kind of personalization happening.
Yeah, definitely can be very good in terms of achieving social presence. What I'd avoid doing, though, is ever mandating that people would turn on their webcams. There's a lot of debate ongoing about it in the EdTech community at the moment, but I think the consensus is, perhaps encourage people to turn on their webcams for the reasons and in the scenarios that Shane has outlined there, where you're doing some kind of initial, I don't know, icebreaker activity or something like that. But I don't know if you gain that much by keeping it on throughout an entire session, unless that session happens to be some, super interactive, participative type tutorial setup, where perhaps you want to have a nice, tile effect of all the different webcam feeds. A lot of the time, of course, you're going to be doing a pretty traditional broadcast, pretty traditional lecture. And in that case, you may very well want to keep things very locked down so that it's just you talking and sharing. And then, when you want to stop and ask a question, you open up the mic again and give students that kind of privilege. I think it is nice to get the voices online. And maybe that's just a kind of a personal view, but I think sometimes it can seem very impersonal to just be receiving, as we are now, actually, questions through chat. But the students will kind of let you know. I think some are more comfortable typing in their questions and comments. Some are very comfortable using the mic. Maybe people in the latter group can be used as a way to encourage people in the former group, perhaps, to start using the mic a bit also. No harm, by the way, to get students maybe to present sometimes, so if you are doing breakout groups, perhaps each breakout group has, a nominated chairperson who reports back as part of some kind of plenary session, or perhaps more formally doing a presentation becomes part of one of the marked assessments for your module.
I actually think that's it for the main. I think a lot of those questions, even on that last slide we've talked about, so the face-to-face whiteboard replacement would be the whiteboard feature in Zoom, or the annotation feature that you can annotate over particular items. I covered those in yesterday's Zoom session, so check out that recording if you haven't seen it. I suppose when it comes to breakout rooms, there's quite a lot of questions around that. So we're going to build a pretty comprehensive session on Tuesday there that will maybe just go through the mechanics of that and just the different ins and outs of it. But apart from that, I'm not sure if there's any outstanding questions. Thanks, Dara, for answering all those questions in the Q&A. We had a lot of activity there, and also through YouTube. I suppose it's maybe just worth noting again, just the supports. One of the main ones, again, would be support.zoom.us. And I suppose I emphasize this because I suppose as a small team, we can't keep up with the article generation, I suppose, for every sort of possibility of use of Zoom. And what we're doing at the moment is concentrating on CIT context and the use of the integration with Canvas and so on. But if you want to dive deeper and get into the features of Zoom, including the likes of breakout rooms or whiteboards or polling and so on, the support.zoom.us resource, go into your users and participants, you're going to see basically screen recordings for most of those features covered pretty well. We'll keep an eye on the the tickets coming in and the queries, and look towards addressing any maybe thematic stuff maybe over the next few weeks as well. But I think over the next few weeks we have that breakout room session. We also have the Canvas stuff happening, and do check in on that support.zoom.us resource. And the other last thing I would say is just to please trying to encourage students to review that announcement in Canvas and to follow those steps so that you're all getting them in, and they're that you get the benefit of them all coming in through authenticated accounts, and you'll have your attendance data and so on there. Um, Anything else there, Gearoid, that you have?
No, maybe one or two things for us to take away and perhaps consider writing help articles about. At least one that I can see us needing maybe a bit of advice on ourselves from Zoom or elsewhere. But look, I think we're nearly up to the hour, which was kind of the intention. So um, might be appropriate to just finish up with that, and to thank yourself and Dara for putting on the session, and to thank everyone who came along and participated.
Okay, thanks very much, everybody. Sure, we'll talk to you shortly again. There is a student session on tomorrow. I think I'm not sure at the time actually. Do you know the time, Gearoid?
Is it 1 o'clock?
1 o'clock. So 1 o'clock session tomorrow for students again, just on those steps to getting set up with Zoom, but also just useful for new students as well. So do maybe send that on if you can, and again that's in that announcement that went out to all students as well. So thanks very much, everyone. Talk to you later.
Thanks, Shane. Thanks, Dara.